introduction.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the talk portion of the evening, and for those who don't already know, there's some water and tea at the front of the bar. There's an all-gender bathroom here, and just take care of each other. I'm going to introduce my friend Mai'a Williams, who is a Afro-pessimist, Marxist feminist, author, and editor of Revolutionary Mothering. Do you have a copy?
Mm-hmm.
Love on the Front Lines, an anthology that was recently put out in the States. She's on book tour in Berlin right now. There's also going to be a reading on the 29th. Is that right? 29th?
I think so.
Yeah. So there's going to be a reading with Tach Bitte and some other Berlin mothers present talking about what mothering means to them. You're also a poet and an author of several works of poetry, a midwife, a mother, and a journalist and an activist who's worked globally from the Congo to Palestine to Ecuador. Yes, all right. You got your mic?
Hi there. So I actually had this other introduction that I was going to edit, worked out in my head, and then I realized, Nadia basically introduced you already. So instead, I'm going to take 2 minutes and say, this is Melanie, and the thing that I absolutely admire about Melanie is that at some of the points in my life in which I needed the most amount of support, she was one of those people who stepped up over and over again. And I think for me, people theoretically can talk about community accountability and transformative justice and blah, 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 but I actually got to see you do it in action. And that, yeah.
Thank you. The title, I'm gonna blush a lot. The title of our talk today is, we're talking about community accountability, and my hope is that maybe in the last 30 minutes or 2 days or whatever, you had a chance to poke around and figure out what we mean when we say that. But I'm gonna give a very short overview of what I'm talking about when I talk about community accountability, and I also use the word transformative justice. I use them somewhat interchangeably. And you can read more about this in the toolkit for activists that's on that table right over there. But mostly what I'm talking about is a social movement that was created primarily in the US, coming out of women of color who were looking at the prison system and criminalization and policing and saying we absolutely need an alternative to this. We can't just talk about prison reform, we actually have to talk in a more visionary way about abolishing prisons altogether. And a lot of those women of color, trans people of color, queer people of color, working in the anti-violence sector and seeing how anti-violence mainstream or white stream anti-violence organizations participate in that state violence all the time by basically giving survivors of sexual violence and intimate partner violence a really limited range of options that usually is about going to the police or going and doing individualized therapy. So in the many ways that we see women of color, trans people of color, queer people of color kind of being the bridge, maybe you guys know this famous anthology, This Bridge Called My Back, from the 70s. Y'all's anthology is very much a follow-up to that groundbreaking work. But basically this group of folks making a criticism in two directions, criticizing the prison abolition movement for being too male-dominated and not thinking about gender, not thinking about alternatives for addressing gender-based violence that are happening in the movement, in the left, focusing too much only on state violence. And on the other hand, criticizing the feminist movement, a white-dominated feminist movement, for only thinking about interpersonal violence and not thinking about the ways that they are collaborating with and complicit in state violence. And what came out of those critiques is a series of very radical experiments, a lot of failures, a lot of crazy ideas, and we're going to kind of explore some of those tonight. I also have to say I had a really fucked up week, and I'm coming here actually really pissed because I was involved in a community accountability process that turned into a total disaster, and the people around the person causing harm were totally not accountable. And that's real, so I'm here to be real with the pain of that, and that's part of why I wanted to subtitle the talk, community accountability, the good, the bad, and the ugly, so that we can just have real talk about what's going on and the difficulties of these experiments and not romanticize them. But I want to focus first on Mai'a's work, and I want to turn the mic over to you to tell us more about revolutionary mothering and how that's connected to building communities that can address and prevent violence.
I can do that. Okay. Hi there. Hi, everybody. Wow. Hi. Okay. My name is Mai'a Williams, and I am, among other things, the mother to a 10-year-old. So what I want to do is give a really quick moment to show how this book came about, the history of it, and then talk a little bit about what I think of as sort of the ideological moments that this book does. Okay, so this book took about 7 years to create. And by the way, for those of you who've not, that's a real time. It took about 7 years from start to finish. And it started off because let me do it this way. So I used to work in Palestine in the West Bank, right? And I worked with, and I started to realize in a year and a half that I worked in Palestine in 2003, 2004, and then 2006. My daughter was actually conceived in 2006 in Bethlehem. I wanted to be born there, which I thought would be, never mind. I realized in doing that work that the best community organizers, the people who I saw who were doing the real work, pushing back against, at the time, the occupation, it was the Second Intifada, were mothers. Just always, were always the ones who held it down, were the ones who created the community, who created all the networks that were needed in order for survival to happen, not just for food and for basic living, which is critical in most of the work, also reproducing the people who were the actual fighters and so on and so forth, but they were also the ones who were making sure that not just their community, but even those of us who were foreigners were safe and taken care of and had what we needed so we could do what we needed. They were also the ones who were on the front lines. I just learned basically that it's mothers in resistance communities who are actually doing most of the work of the resistance. And I said, okay, clearly mothers are the best community organizers. I saw the same thing when I was working in the Congo. We worked in the DRC in 2005 doing research on the effects of the war on the women. And although that makes the women in the DRC seem like victims, I really discovered that I was sitting in rooms like this with this many people who were all women, the majority of whom were mothers, were sitting there telling me about organizing civil society, and they're doing so with children on their backs, with children running around. It was just a really different space than I saw, let's say, happening in the left in the West, which is primarily, you don't see very many children. Just checking. Don't worry, I'm not critiquing you guys. I am a little bit, you guys. Where are the children? Where did you put them? And I realized that these women were doing the really hard work of making society and making resistance. And so I decided I wanted to be, and I've always wanted to be, a really good community organizer. So obviously I became a mother. So, which again, I realized later on that that's a weird space for a lot of people to imagine, that I thought mothering led to you being a better community organizer, where, to be honest, in the West, oftentimes, mothering kind of takes you out of activism. And it's not, and I'd like to point out, we'll talk about why for a second, we'll talk about the ways that's destroying the leftist movements. Following me? Okay, where were we?
Oh,
right.
the ideological moment of
the ideological moment.
What is the book about?
Right, so the book came about out of that, for me, out of that realization. And then I met Alexis Pauline Gumbs and China Martins and decided we wanted to do an anthology looking at these issues. So here's my ideological moment. I'll do this quickly. My basic thing when it comes to revolutionary mothering is I say, we are not the ones destroying the earth. Mothers get blamed for almost every major societal ill that exists, right? And if you think about it for a second, so I base it from the States, but we could do this in Germany if I spoke German probably. So black mothers only create criminals, right? That's what black mothers do. They reproduce criminality according to sort of like society. Immigrant mothers create what we call anchor babies, right? Poor mothers are just sucking off the teat of the government. Queer mothers, right, are destroying the very basics of family, and thank God. Who else do we have here? We can keep going. Over and over again, we see that mothers, especially marginalized mothers, are basically blamed for reproducing, and they're blamed thus so that somehow their very reproduction is destroying society. And my pushback to that is we are not the ones destroying the earth. We didn't cause this, you know? We didn't cause the 2008 Wall Street crash. That wasn't us. You know, we didn't cause the Katrina catastrophe that happened. That wasn't black mothers. You know, over and over again, we didn't cause the environmental degradation that's happened to this world. That was huge corporations. That's not mothers. And it's not only that we not cause any of those, but actually we're the ones who are on the front lines and who have to deal with the catastrophes that happen the most. When a housing crisis happens, it's mothers and children who are the first to be actually affected. You know, when Katrina happened, it was mothers who were the first to be affected. When the Israelis come into Palestine, it's mothers and then children who are the ones who are first affected. You know, they're the ones who actually. So over and over again, we're the ones who are on the front lines. We're the ones who are most affected. We're the ones who really need to be centered in the work. And then lastly, we're also the ones who, if there is any hope for the 22nd, for us as a humanity making it into the 22nd century, it will be because of mothers and their children, okay? And that is because we're on the front lines, we're also the ones who are creating the new economies and the new ecologies and the new communities and the new survival and resistance techniques in order that all of humanity can survive. So I leave that to ask the question then, of course, in what ways are our movements not reflecting that reality, right? So how is it, and then I'm gonna call everyone out here for a second, how is it that we can have a space in which leftists and activists get together and there are no children, if they're the ones who need to be centered in the work in order to make sure that we all can do it? Do you see what I'm saying? So that's the ideological moment. Okay.
I wanted to also point out maybe some of the idea of mothering in the book. As far as I understand it, it's like mothering from a point of view of women of color and queer folks. So not talking about mothering as a biological experience, but mothering as a relationship of care and making the life of another human being possible, and that those are relationships that we're actually doing all the time with people that we love. So thinking about mothering in a really broad way.
Right, it's not, and I should have pointed that out, that mothering is not about gender. I'm not talking about mothering as like female biological reproductive systems. I'm talking about mothering as the act of caretaking, as the act of creating community, which it's to be said, a lot of people who do biological mothering do, because that's the work that they've chosen to do. And it's not gendered either. You know, mothering can be done by anybody. Alice Walker says that, I'm gonna butcher her. I'm sorry, I'm gonna butcher Alice Walker for a second. Forgive me. She says mothering is an instinct, yes, but it's also a skill. It can be learned. And I take it one step further and I say, and it should be learned by everybody in order that we'll survive.
So I want to think about how last time when we talked, we were talking about motherful communities. So like thinking about that as another term for communities that care about each other and take care of each other. And when we see, especially when we're dealing with communities where people are experiencing interpersonal harm, so you know the focus of the toolkit and my work with the Transformative Justice Kollektiv Berlin, which I forgot to introduce them, but maybe you already met them at their table. We've been around for like 5 years. Our focus is on sexual violence and intimate partner violence, which is just one form of interpersonal violence. But thinking about that work, and the need to find ways of supporting each other, taking care of each other, and holding people accountable who cause harm. A lot of times when cases happen, we find that there's actually not a community. There's not people who feel that they don't feel responsible for each other. They feel like, oh, that's not my problem, or I don't want to get involved, that's not my conflict. And so I think I've seen in my own work and I've heard from a lot of people that community building is the work itself. And especially when we think about the ways that neoliberal capitalism are like destroying our relationships to each other or commodifying our relationships to each other, turning care into something that's bought and sold. And I kind of think about the work from Northwest Network, and also Les Migras in Berlin talks about this, that, you know, maybe what we need before we react to crisis situations where harm has happened, before we're dealing with really extreme cases of violence or stories that have, you know, that have been going on for many years, we need like basic level conflict resolution and care skills within our communities. And oftentimes that's lacking. And so I know that the Northwest Network talks about it in terms of building accountable communities rather than a community accountability. So building a culture where we actually like talk to each other and feel responsible for the things that we promised that we're going to do for other people. And we actually feel obligated to intervene when people aren't doing well, when people are hurting each other. And all of that sounds like really basic work, and yet it's totally marginalized in a lot of leftist culture and a lot of leftist communities. There's very little infrastructure for teaching people how to take care of each other, actually, and encouraging people to do that. And I also think, you know, when we talk about community, we as a group have really struggled to translate that word into German. A lot of our work as a collective has been, you know, being inspired by these ideas from the US and then translating them into a German context. The toolkit is kind of my effort to put a lot of the analyses and the wisdom from US movements and look at what it means for our German and Berlin setting. But we've always really struggled with the word community, and we've always gotten a lot of pushback and confusion about what is a community and who is a community. And I think we can't be naive and romantic about what communities are and thinking about, oh, we need to go back to a time before community was destroyed. I think we have to recognize that communities are spaces where violence and power and structural injustice are already playing out, right? So a lot of times we have to build communities, build networks of care that are going to be able to respond before a crisis happens, before a case comes up. I want to turn it back over to you about, you had some more thoughts about mothering.
I probably did somewhere.
Oh, yeah. About like,
Right.
having different needs.
So kind of bridging off of that a bit is, excuse me for a second. Oh, also, excuse me, I had a cold when I got here, speaking of caretaking, and then it has become this other thing in my life. So it's like a monster living inside of me. So I'm a little shaky, you'll have to excuse me. It's disgusting. Okay, so one of the things that I think has happened, especially under neoliberal capitalism, is that we have basically created a society, and Sylvia Federici and Selma James and Maria Della Costa talk about this. If y'all don't know her, read them. Talk about the ways that that as a society we have basically made mothers or the household or the community as sort of the unwaged work to reproduce workers, right? And so when we talk about mothering, what we're talking about when we talk about mothering and caretaking is being able to do caretaking work outside of, or like as a way of resistance against like neoliberal capitalism, right? And I think that that's actually sometimes a hard moment for people to wrap their brain around, because they assume that to do caretaking is to do so in service of capitalism, right? So for instance, like, you know, I've been a housewife before, and the assumption is that my job is to reproduce both my partner's life, the food, the housework, the whatever, I won't go through all of it, and my daughter's life, so that they can be good workers, right? So, and then I send her to school so that she can become the kind of person who can do these kinds of activities that allow for her to get a job, right? And so we want to look at when we look at mothering, we're talking about looking at it at reproduction as a way not to fulfill that, but as a way to push against it. And that's how I see it. That's how I see my work, as I'm helping to create and reproduce human beings, both my daughter and the community that we live in a way that the world will actually be less, I'm not sure what the word is, but so they'll be less effective for capitalism, right? So I'll just take a short moment so for instance, my daughter spent half her life living in Egypt. She did the Arab Spring, right? Last year we were at Standing Rock, and I see that as my actual work, you know? And I also think that when we start to create real communities and networks of care, we give people the opportunity to be able to create those kinds of families and those kinds of human beings, you know? And we can't do that. Like, that's why, just for a second, that's why I asked the question, where are the children? Because I'm like, well, how is your movement gonna be around in 20 years? You know, like, if you don't, anyways, just a question.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if we want to talk about reproductive justice stuff, or if we want to transition into talking about community accountability.
Let's do community accountability.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of kind of segue back and forth between a revolutionary mothering approach and thinking about community accountability. So I wanted to just invite Mai'a to share some of the ways in which you've been involved in confronting violence in different communities that you've been a part of, and some of the lessons you've learned about what it takes to confront harm outside of the state, especially in the context of Egypt in revolutionary times. Obviously there is no state, the state's the enemy, so you guys were really in many ways in a crisis situation, and I think there are some lessons out of that experience about, you know, how to deal with harm in those settings.
Yeah, wait,
Did you turn yourself off?
I did. I turned it off and I put it down because I'm afraid that, like,
Oh, yeah.
you know, life. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of moments that I wanted to kind of touch towards, but one of them is definitely finding ways. So, yeah, Arab Spring, Revolution, Egypt, Tahrir, we're good. 2011. I don't have to give a history lesson. Just we're good. So one of the things that happened, of course, is that it was against the police. So there were times when when the Egyptians, when we managed to push the police out of the communities. Also, the police suck. So you wanted to be able to find ways to deal with, to be able to create community and create systems of care, but to do so in ways that we didn't rely on the police. Like, there's no way we're inviting the police into our house. And I mean that as that never happened. Like, in all the time I was in Egypt, no one ever called. Like, that seems, sure, I'll just let the rabid dog, never mind. Rabid dogs are actually much nicer. So one of the things that we had to learn, though, was because we were in crisis situations and because there was still violence that happened, there were still moments of violence that happened within the communities, even though there's a larger moment that's happening outside about, the fact that, like, there's tear gas and there's tanks going through the streets and so on and so forth, but there's also violence that happened, honestly, gendered violence, domestic violence that happened within small communities, but the opportunity to kick people out and simply be exclusive was much less. There was no way to dispose of people. Does that make sense? And so we had to find ways to be able to make some type of justice happen in the communities without being able to call on these state mechanisms, we're not going to call the army because, some guy decided to beat up his girlfriend. Like, that's not a real thing that can happen. And one of the things that we learned on you talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. One of the things that we learned is that, okay, I'm going to say this and I'm going to toss back over to you because I feel like, you'll see. Is that, the person who did the abuse, so there's a pattern that seemed to happen, which is that the person who did the abuse, on one hand, would be like socially ostracized, but only for this short amount of time. And then, and I started to try to figure out why that was happening. Like, why does this keep happening, man? And I realized it's because the person who does the abuse oftentimes, not always, I know, oftentimes has more social power, right? And so it's almost like human nature to want to lean towards the people who have more, because they have more opportunity for you. They have more access, they have money, they can move about society easier, and you want to have that kind of freedom and access as well. And so we had to find ways to be able to make sure that people who had less social power were able to also have that freedom and that access. And I can talk about what that looked like practically on the ground, but I feel like we're running out of time, and I don't want to go into the details of it. But I just want to say that was the mechanism, and it wasn't easy and it wasn't always effective, but it was still, I think, better or less violent than calling on the state, and also at the same time it meant that we had because you still needed to have that community in order to be able to survive a civil war that was happening. You couldn't just walk away and join some other group and then you're fine, because there is no other place you can go, and neither is there for anyone else. And I think that that's the kind of work that we have to learn how to do. I think that we need to, I often ask people, what are you going to do if it was a crisis situation? If you knew you couldn't just leave, what would be the real answer here? So I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, I'm also remembering some of the stories you told about low level, in a situation of civil war and revolution, you're suddenly finding yourself in community with people who you don't share a lot of the same values with. And so people are saying homophobic shit and you just throw cigarette butts at them to let them know that that's not fucking okay. Or you have to find strategies to express yourself within, these very fragile collaborations. I think one thing that we talked about that I wanted to touch on was the experimental nature of a lot of these alternatives that we're coming up with, and that there's a lot of failure, there's a lot of half successes. I feel like I hear about success more in terms of collectively supporting people. Sometimes I hear about success in terms of people who cause harm and who do violence actually changing. Most of the stories I hear about that are from the US and not from Berlin. And they involve pretty well set up processes with people who have a lot of training or experience. But I think that we're kind of sitting with in this impossible situation that using, obviously we're not in the situation that you went through in Egypt, but it represents this sort of impossible scenario that we can't call in the state, and yet we don't have what we need. And I think one of the issues we talked about is that there are no right answers.
Yeah.
Right, and all of us are struggling, not knowing what the right approach is. And I think I see a lot of difficulty in tolerating that ambivalence. And part of that, I think a huge block to having successful processes, in my experience, is a politics of moral hygiene. People, especially in the Berlin left, being less interested in social change and mass mobilizing people to change our conditions, and more interested in the desire to be good and the desire to be pure and to compete with each other about who's more good and who's more pure. And a lot of the ways that we build trust and relationship, in my experience in the Berlin setting, is through bibliography. It's have you read the same things as me? Do we use the same language? Did we read the same books?
We
ideologically on the same page.
Exactly, like check, check, check. Okay, you're cool with me. Which is it's a problem because how are you going to build community with people who don't read, can't read, people who read in a different language, people who've read different books. And I know I've talked about this with friends in the States, talking about how their strategy is about not sharing bibliography, but sharing biography. So sharing people's stories of like, this is where I'm coming from, this is where I'm vulnerable, this is what I've lived through, and building trust and relationship through that, right? And so then when you're in a situation in a community where shit's popping off and people are in conflict, violence is happening, you know what people's sensibilities are, you know what some people's deep needs are, you have a kind of an emotional landscape of what's going on. And I keep coming back to that because I feel like we in the left in Berlin have like some really good ideological skills and are like really missing a lot of the interpersonal human emotional skills that I think would make us better at mothering each other, basically. And I think when I think about the ways that, like, identity politics, by which maybe I mean an intersectional awareness of how oppression is playing out in our everyday lives, when I see how that's, especially some of the ways that that's been imported from the US into Germany and the way that that's playing out in terms of competing over who's the bigger victim, who's the bigger perpetrator. And a lot of that for me, I see, reminds me of stuff I see in the US around white folks and white folks not being able to deal with their privilege, feeling a lot of shame and guilt, and really wanting to be clean, wanting to be right, wanting to be on the right side and have the absolute best ideological position so that they can't be attacked. And I understand the safety of dogmatism. I understand why we are there. I also understand why people are afraid of being wrong. We live in a culture that uses like shame and punishment to tell people who they need to be and to produce functional laboring subjects. And so part of what we're trying to get to is, how are we going to get out of that mess? How are we going to teach people and share what we want from them, what we need from them, what kind of behaviors we expect, without using shame and punishment. And let's get real. Sometimes it doesn't work and you're like, yeah, fuck yeah, I want public shame. I'm done with my transformative approach. I gave it my all and I got nothing. So I'm not here to like judge any choices that survivors make, right? And I think we can also have like grand visions and try to reconcile them with like pretty rocky realities. But I do think in some ways for me, what I find so healing about community accountability as a philosophy is that it doesn't start from the position that we're all wonderful people. It starts from the position that we all have the ability to hurt each other. No matter our position, we all have in some time in our lives, the ability to oppress other people and the ability to harm other people. And what does it mean to reorganize our lives around that? Around, okay, we're all vulnerable to each other and we can all cause harm, and what would it mean to then own that, sit with that, and not react. We had a conversation about that. I think the biggest block, I want to say hinderness, the biggest block to getting people to be responsible when they fuck up is morality and moral hygiene. So morality is like really focused on like, what does this behavior say about me and the deep status of my soul and my being and my role in the community, and it's like, no. Let's talk about behavior. Let's not talk about identity. Let's talk about you fucked up. That's okay. It doesn't have to be about your deep intentions. It can be about impact. Let's look at what your actions mean for other people, less than what it means for yourself. So I think that moves us from morality into politics, basically. So
I wanted to, there's she's a mentor of mine, Angel Mai'a Williams. She is the first or second Black Buddhist priest, like Zen priest. And she has this talk, if you want to go find it for a second, it's online, Yahoo, not YouTube, I don't know what my brain is today, on YouTube. But what she says is, what if it's not about love? What if it's about justice? And so when she says that, I just got, oh, because she says, what if it's not about who you personally are, like, you know, you're spending your entire life trying to be the best you can be and love yourself. She's like, what if it's about justice? What if it's simply about making sure that we all get what we need and like that I make sure that you get, because justice requires relationship in a way, you know? It's like self-justice sounds, you can't really do self-justice. Like, maybe you can in German. Can you do self-justice? I feel like Germany is very individualistic. I feel like people would really love it.
Do justice to yourself.
Yeah. Can you do, is it
Maybe you would do like solo vigilante justice. I don't know.
Just go on your
I don't
ass.
think that's what you mean.
Anyway, so I do think that's part of it too, is, and that's something actually I try to teach my daughter a lot, is that, look, you're a good person or whatever, like that's cool, like, okay, I'm affirming her, I'm not, but at the same time, what you do is how you live, like that's actually, that's how you live or die. That's what, you know, that's the hill you stand on, is what you actually do and how it actually impacts other people. The end. All the rest of it is fluff for me. But I also gave up on self-actualization, so.
That sounds like a good decision. I want to keep an eye on time.
Okay.
I feel like we could talk forever, but I don't know if we want to say anything about survivor support. For me, it was important. I already said this in the earlier introduction, but it was important to have the exhibition being about healing, and it's called Healing Archives. I'm thinking about different like ways that people are getting their healing work done. So like Olivia had this amazing work interviewing different folks with like positive affirmations that she can listen to on her bad days. And having that as sort of like a playlist of supportive voices. And I think that oftentimes, like I said in the beginning, when we start talking about alternatives to prison and police, we're focusing a lot on what do we do with people who harm if we can't kick them out of our communities and we can't put them in this lock them up in this carceral place. And sometimes that's like sucking all the air out of the room, and that's sucking all the energy and resources out of our communities, and we're not actually recentering the people that have been harmed and focusing on our solidarity with them. So I don't know if you wanted to share any
I'll
stories.
just really quick.
Yeah.
This one's
It's not actually a story, but it is. I am also, among other things, I'm the managing editor for a magazine, called The Body Is Not an Apology, and that's a lot of the work that we do is around how do we recenter those who are most vulnerable in society. You know, the body's not an apology basically says that everybody has the right to walk around in the world as who they are fully, and for it to be celebrated fully, the end, like, and stop, right? Whether that's, you know, about sexuality or whether or not it's about however your body shows up in the world. And so I think that, like, one, you can read it if you like, and two, we did a really great piece on emotional, on men and emotional justice this week. So if you want to, you know, take a moment for that. And the other thing is that I find that when I'm working with writers, one of the things that, and what works for me as well, is that being able to actually write yourself into the world, like being able to actually make yourself represented in the world as you actually are is crucial. You know, like that. Shame is killing us, honestly, and shaming each other is killing us, and shaming ourselves is literally, this is not metaphorical. I don't. It's killing us, and so I feel like that's the work we need to do every day, is to make it so that if we're gonna survive, we're gonna have to do it in some way without using self-shame and other shame as the primary way that we regulate what we can and cannot do in the world. So,
I'm wondering if we want to turn it over to audience questions. Feedback? Comments? Yes? Give you some time to reflect.
I can pass my mic.
I was a teacher for 8 years, so I'm really comfortable with awkward silence. And I'll just give you time to think about your task.
I'll volunteer.
Thank you, wife.
So first of all, this was a really amazing talk. Thank you, Mai'a, so much. Now, you're great, as always. It is indeed a lot to process, and especially at a time where I personally think about mothering, becoming a mother a lot. And I'm confronted many times, unfortunately, with that idea that mothering is, people associate it with some kind of biological relationship, and particularly a relationship that kind of binds you, confines you, and has nothing to do with liberation. And the worst thing actually that I hear about becoming a mother or mothering is that you cannot be part of the revolution anymore because you're extra vulnerable, and this is a security factor or a security risk, something like that, I think people have this kind of misconception that a revolution is armed struggle and that's it, and you cannot have a baby and some Kalashnikov in the other hand. So that kind of, I hope you are all laughing because you kind of know what I mean. I think it's also some kind of self-critique to the German left, that kind of misconception of revolution, and I was just wondering if you could, help me confront that kind of dogma.
You know what's funny about working in Palestine? There are lots of mothers and lots of kids. Oh, and in the Congo, lots of mothers and lots of kids. There are mothers and kids everywhere, okay? It's not like, I don't know how people imagine the world works, but it's not like it's only like men and unattached women running out there and everyone else is hiding in their houses, shivering. It's quite, that's not how the world works, you guys. It's just not. But I know what you're saying because when I got pregnant in Palestine. It was 2006, Israel was bombing Lebanon, Israel was kind of bombing Gaza. Israel was doing a lot that summer, is my point. They were real busy. And I got pregnant, I was a journalist. And everyone around me, not everyone, all of the white Westerners were like, Mai'a, what are you gonna do? Your life, what will happen to your life? And I was like, I guess I'll just be like all the other mothers here. I'll put my kid on my back and I'll keep going. How do you think, that's how life happens. So that's my first thing. My second thing is to say that I think that comes about because people want to imagine that they can create this ultimate, that it is my job, and it's not my job. This is not my job. My job is not to create this ultimately safe space for my kid. That's not life. Sorry. I understand. That's not it. My job is to create safety. My job is to create, emotional security. My job is to feed, my job is to make sure she's happy and good. Yes, but that is not guaranteed. There's no guarantees in life, And I asked the other question, which is, okay, let's say, but the activist left assumes that you can leave it. What happens when you can't leave? What happens when you can't leave the resistance? Because I worked in Chiapas. I was at the Women's Encuentro in 2007. These are women who were on the front lines, and they have children, clearly, multiple children. A lot of children were there. But everywhere I've ever worked, that's what it looks like. It looks like women and children. So if you guys are working, I'm gonna be honest, like I'm not saying you guys, but I've been in the States for 2 years now, so it's me too. Oh, and by the way, Standing Rock was created by the Native youth. That's who created Standing Rock, if you guys know what Standing Rock is. You know, they brought the rest of the community along, like, to be able to create that. Of course, look at what it is. Of course it was youth who created it. It wasn't a bunch of old men. Who would think of that, right? So, for me, that's at this point, such a weird conception to think of it the other way. Like, I'm sorry, but I find it very difficult for me to understand how the social imagination has it that people who are the least vulnerable would have the best ideas. You know what I mean? Like I don't, like, Black Lives Matter was created by mothers, right? Because they're the ones who are actually affected by the situation the most. It's their children who are getting shot down. They're the ones having to go to jail and go to funerals for their own children. They're the ones who create Black Lives Matter. So, does that make sense? Like, it's hard for me to see it the other way now. I mean, unattached people are great. Some of my best friends. I'm not trying to say, but it's really hard for me to think of, and I tell people, I'll just say this, excuse my language, but I don't fuck with movements that don't center mothering. Not because of me. I didn't fuck with movements that didn't center mothering before I had my kid, because they're not going to be effective. And I just don't want to I don't have time to mess with movements that are just here making fluff and ideological whatever. I'm here to, like, win. You know? So mothers win. So I don't, like, I'm sorry. I just don't, like, okay. Anyways, I didn't do, obviously, a lot of activist work in Berlin.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think that for people who haven't checked out the book, that a lot of what you guys, so the introduction to the book, who wrote that?
Loretta Ross.
Loretta Ross, who was very involved in creating the reproductive justice framework in the 90s in the US. And I think a lot of, just to give background on this, that the white women's movement has been having conversations for a long time about abortion and the right of women to not be mothers and not have children and not fulfill this hetero-patriarchal vision of the precious white mother and her children. And we know that that's actually mobilized a lot, the idea of protecting the white mother and children from all these other racialized groups of people. This is mobilized all the time in racist policing discourses on policing and, well, also colonialist discourses on policing and prison. And so really you seeing the criticism of that model of motherhood as actually really specific to and accessible only to a small group of people, which were middle-class white women. And Alexis Pauline Gumbs in the book talks about that Black mothering is a queer thing because Black mothers have been stripped of their right to mother. They've had their children, as enslaved people, were raped. They were forced to carry children. They had their children sold away from them. If we talk about contemporary situations, you have refugee mothers and I say mothers, maybe we say it in a non-gendered way, all kinds of people that are caring for small people, stripped away from their families because of deportation. We also, so I think part of it is about turning the lens and looking at who hasn't been allowed to create families of choice, not even biological families, just any kind of family, who has been, not just who has been encouraged to create certain kinds of families, but who's been blocked from that access. And so I understand the reproductive justice framework to be about allowing us to freely choose who we want to build our families with, families of all kinds. And I think that's also an important moment in Berlin for talking about, the National Socialism long history of sterilizing people, taking away their right.
Mothers.
What?
Deciding who can and who should and who should not be.
Exactly. Deciding who can and who should be a mother or a parent. And even, Germany is so fake homo-friendly. Queer people don't have the ability to adopt children in this country. That's insane, right? So people are not allowed to create the kinds of bonds that they want to. And I think when we're talking about mothering, you're centering a lot the idea of intergenerational bonds, which is about, yes, it's about bonds with small people. It's also about bonds with people that are older than us. And about, I know that that's also pretty central, thinking about like the wisdom of older generations and ancestors, and that we actually really need to build those bridges, right? And when we talk about criticizing German leftist spaces, thinking about who has access, right? Who is able to be here. I mean, we fucked up, we didn't provide childcare, so it's also our fault. But, okay, enough on that. Anyways, you've all had more time to think. So maybe, yes.
I think Mai'a, this is the first time you see me speaking. I think we know each other for 9 years ago.
No, I heard you speak English 4 years ago. It was my
4
first
years
time.
ago.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so actually I remember like how I know you, because normally I think when we met I was not speaking English. So because we spent a lot of time together for different reasons. The first thing I remember in Toria's bar is the bartender, he asked me, do you know Maia's daughter? I said, no. He said, I think you have to know her. And I don't know why he said to me that. And I don't know if you realize how this community we live inside, and with those different group for different reasons, you know them. Do you know how they know you as Mai'a, the mother?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. Actually, I don't know who you are. Actually, this is the first time I know who you are. I assume I know you, but because also there is this image of actually I was a bit thinking about all this Western society in downtown in Cairo in a general idea, but yeah, I can think, yeah, you managed to tell this message, how you think about motherhood, because I think all of my friends around, if they remember you, they will remember your daughter immediately, for different reasons.
This is an amazing kid.
Yeah.
Okay, I have so many questions, but we'll talk afterwards. Because we've known each other, we met in Cairo in 2010, I think, 2009, 2010, and it's like, there's a lot of, yeah. But I did, and you know, I used to tell you this, I did bring my daughter with me, like, not every moment of my life, but I brought her everywhere, which is a very controversial thing in Europe. But yeah, she's solid. Like the fact that she's not here with me right now feels a little, but I need the break.
Yeah, you had her at the bar, you had her at the demonstration.
Yeah, I had her at the bar, I had her at the demonstration, I had her, if we went out with friends, they'd be like, where's your kid, why isn't she with you? And Berlin is a very weird thing, that's like the opposite world, like where people are like, why is your kid here? And I'm like, because she's human. And she too wants to participate in society. It's not my job to create for her these tiny little worlds that are like, I guess only people who are her same age, and they all have to play together and they all have to be, do you understand? It feels very tight and very, it feels very inhuman to me, the way that we've organized and structured out how we deal with children. And it's cool, like do your thing. I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just saying it feels restrictive. I mean, it also feels restrictive on me. It feels restrictive on mothers in general, because if your kids can only do these really small spaces, then you suddenly have taken yourself out of general society and moved yourself into basically living in preschool, right? And I don't actually like kids that much that I'm gonna hang out with them every single moment. I like my kid. I don't like all kids. In general, yes. But yeah,
Are there other? Oh, yeah, you did.
I thought a lot, like talking about vulnerability, I thought a lot about like the tendency of movements here to, build consent by cloning or something, like this identity politics thing that you spoke about, but like, for that,
Wait,
I
can you
wonder,
explain? Build consent? No, build.
like building consent, like consent as a, like as the answer to many problems. And I was wondering, like through your practical work, creating accountability or transforming and organizing communities, maybe what's your thoughts on like the necessity for like constructive dissent, with probably like from what you said, like centering the most vulnerable people in like who's listened to. Yeah, I would be glad maybe to hear about like what you think, like how much the obsession for consent is needed for social justice movements, or like if it's rather hindering people from accepting differences. I get stuck with that question.
Okay, let me see if I understood it. So the idea of the consent, not just in the sense that everyone agrees, but that people are similar, like they share the same identity and they've read the same things, and they, is that what I understood?
Okay.
Right, consensus rather than, yeah. Mhm. Oh yeah, we're always trying to think a lot about the relationship between consensus and consent, which is one of the ways we talk about sexuality a lot in like anti-violence work. Wait, so your question is like, what is the room for dissent?
Yeah, or
Yeah.
like what do you think, like how much consensus, like what are ways to know you building consensus without like becoming dogmatic, moralistic,
Oh yeah.
and rather having like reflective ethics, speaking through actions rather than words.
Yeah. Oh, these are really hard questions. I don't know. I hope you don't mind if I say, but I am in a reading group with this awesome person, Zoya. We met the other day, and we were reading this book called "Conflict Is Not Abuse," which is a controversial book. But we had a long conversation about what is actually that spectrum from conflict to violence or abuse. And what I understand is that maybe productive dissent can be in the realm of conflict. And then at some point it tips over into something like abuse or violence, which is no longer productive or positive. Man, we're just figuring this out. Zoya, do you want to say something about this? Okay. One of the things that I was really touched by in that discussion was talking about when someone was talking about trust. So that the possibility to keep having communication to resolve a problem is only possible if people trust each other. And a lot of that has to do, I think, with connection, like looking someone in the eye. What happens though in a lot of cases of violence and sexual violence is that connection is so broken and trust is so broken that it's actually a lot of the restorative justice techniques that are used, sorry, it's making that noise. That are used in Germany, kind of, we talk about it as like Täter-Opfer-Ausgleich. These are techniques that originally come from indigenous peoples' principles of justice that are a lot about bringing people together at a table who've been harmed by violence to fix that violence. And what we find, there's been a lot of criticism of that in the case of sexual violence and partner violence, because bringing people together where there's such a harm and break of trust and connection, and often a huge power imbalance, either a social power imbalance or the violence itself has created an imbalance of power, makes it really hard for those people to be together at a table in any way that's not just going to perpetuate the patterns of violence and abuse that have been going on. And so what happens a lot is that you get a mediated process, right? You have some folks that are supporting the survivor, some folks that are trying to work with, confront and hold the perpetrator accountable, and those groups come together to try to build trust and talk to each other. I think that doesn't answer your question at all, but I think what I can say about this is that I think when we're getting outside of the criminal legal model, we're getting outside of universal standards. So we're getting outside of a sentencing schedule of punishments, like this crime equals this long in prison, or this behavior requires this response. We're thinking more in terms of needs, right? So this situation, what are the needs of the people involved? And how can we make sure that we prioritize the needs of the people who've been most violated and marginalized and had their needs most neglected? Sometimes when you work on the basis of needs, you don't actually have to have any ideological agreement. It's like kind of magical. Sometimes people can get their needs met and like have really different values, and that's enough for shit to work again. So yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Other? Oh, sorry. I should not be moderating. Okay, maybe you and then you.
And then over here as well.
Okay.
Usually I have the feeling that it's always the same group of people who maybe practice revolutionary mothering, and really often it's female socialized people, but not always. And I was wondering, because you were talking earlier about how if you have an idea how to bring this closer, this idea to people who usually have not been doing this, so that it's not always the same group of people caring and taking care and doing all this revolutionary mothering. And then in the end maybe also going over their own borders because they give so much and the other people always take, but because of this dynamic also not learning to do the same.
Do you want to take that one? Yeah.
I can take that.
Yeah, right. I have a, Mel knows, I have a thing about emotional labor. Actually, it happened in Berlin, and I was like, nope. Like, there's a point of like, there are certain people who are, what I say is that there are people who are, that revolutionary mothering is not gendered, but there are people who have been socialized and taught to do this work, and the rest of society just simply expects it of them, and also without compensation, right? Like, it's emotional labor, it's caretaking without compensation, or real compensation, other than whatever. The short answer is no, I don't know. If I did, man, I'd write a different book. like, honestly. So if anyone knows, talk to me. Because so again, I feel like what ends up happening is I have to be the one, or that like, people who do mothering have to be the ones who have to create these boundaries and reinforce. And that's another type of emotional labor, is to constantly be creating boundaries and reinforcing the boundaries and blah, 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 and so on and so forth. And by the time you're tired of that, so you just do the thing anyway. Oh my goodness. So the only thing that I can say is that I believe dearly, and I believe fiercely, that there has to come a point when humanity, piece by piece, community by community, I want to talk about the Zapatistas for a moment, where I got to see a little bit of that happening, where communities are under, what's what I'm looking for?
Leadership?
No, under conflict, who are living under like...
siege.
Yeah, who are besieged, thank you. Who are besieged, that it sooner or later starts to dawn on people in Zapatista communities, they were called men, who are not doing a lot of that labor, who are not required or expected to realize that like their survival is gonna require this. Like either you learn this or no one's gonna make it. Because there's too much to do, and you can keep pretending like it all should go on to like women and mothers and blah, 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 but you gotta survive. And I feel like I would love it if people learned that earlier on, before the revolution, like learning it, because it's a set of skills and you might need it, like it's not like, and honestly I do think that if people understood how much work and how skilled it was acquired, if people understood that, they'd be actually more interested in, I think that because people think, oh, I'll just do, if I have, it's like, let me give a short, quick example, and then we'll move over. Which is that I was partnered for a while, and it turns out he found out that keeping the house clean is actually a skill. It's a series of skills you have to learn, and if someone's not there to do it for you, the house will not be clean. It's not like you can just learn it in 20 seconds, you know, like. So like it's like that, like that's the best I can say for it.
Yeah, maybe that's the next.
Maybe that's the next toolkit. the
Yeah.
Emotional labor toolkit. Maybe we take a few comments and questions. So there's one here, and then one here. Maybe we
So
take two, and then.
thank you for the speech, first of all. So my question is, how would you introduce the concept of community accountability to a Berlin context, since we don't have such strong communities here? And this was the first step named from you. And which traductions did you find for the community term? Yeah.
Yeah, I can answer that. And maybe we see what the next. So there was a comment here, and then yeah.
Thank you. Actually, one of my questions was kind of already posed. Kind of like you have. First of all, thank you very much. It's an amazing night. And you have this energy, Mai'a, and I was also wondering, like, as I work in a social care field, and sometimes I'm just really fucking sick of caring.
Yeah.
So,
Oh my god, I know.
and I just want to throw up, be it from people, you know, being these greedy people who take it, people you don't like, but it's the right thing to do to care about them. I mean, on and on. So that was kind of like, where does this come from? This regenerative energy that's obviously coursing through you. It's very beautiful. And then I think I actually had a second question, because somebody sort of a hanger on to the person who just spoke before me. What about the ugly? Like, I also work in a place where I hear a lot of like super fucked up, failed community accountability issues, and it's happening in activist communities that are very vulnerable, and then the most vulnerable people are just getting, you know, made homeless, beaten up, you name it, and yeah. So I guess I can just hang on the other person's question. I mean, where do you start there?
Do you want to take one more, or do we
Do you
want
want
to
to take one more? I'm just trying to keep
Is
them
that
all
too
in
many?
mind. No, it's fine. I think, I don't know until I ask.
I'll take notes.
Try in English. Ist schwer für mich in Englisch, aber ich versuche es. In discussions, I make the experience that it's the arguments to against the state and police are quite good. Also for persons who are against the state, but what is with kind of people and violence when the violent people say, I have no problem, it doesn't matter for me. What we can do with this kind of violent people? Do you have any ideas with it?
No. Just to clarify, damn it. Just to clarify, you mean people who commit violence and who don't care about the state? No.
Nee, wo der Staat sagt, die müssen wir ins Gefängnis bringen, um die Gesellschaft zu schützen. Welche Antworten kann man da geben, ohne jetzt auf das System Gefängnis und Repression zurückzugreifen, wie es der Staat bisher praktiziert?
I think I understood that. Let me get to that in a second, but I guess we don't have a... You can hear me anyways, right? Yeah. Yeah, maybe that helps. Okay.
So I'm going to start with the community question about translating the word community into German. So, and folks from the collective can chime in on this because they did more of that translation work than I ever did. But I know that like the word Gemeinschaft in German has some like kind of creepy National Socialist, ethnic homogeneity connotations. And we also played with words like collective and like Kollektiv and Umfeld. I think that the obsession with community in US politics and from US social movements has like a really specific history that has to do with settler colonialism, multiculturalism. We can get into that if it interests anybody, but it's very specific. But I totally disagree that Berlin doesn't have communities. In many ways, the Berlin left has like so many more community structures, house projects, organizations, all kinds of incredible infrastructures that people have built that are self-organized. I think the issue is that people don't necessarily perceive themselves as part of a community. They live in a house, but they don't necessarily feel that violence from their neighbors upstairs, and I mean in this sense even a house project, right? They don't necessarily feel that the violence happening from their neighbors upstairs
happening in communities
is impacting them, right? And so I think that's part of the first step, and it's very interesting for us as a collective because we usually are, when we are called in a case where violence has already happened, we're coming in like after the disaster, right? And everybody feels kind of broken, and they're recognizing two things. They're recognizing that something has broken, and they're recognizing that they are actually connected to these other people, so that the violence that was happening in their community that they tried to ignore when it explodes and can no longer be hidden or be visible does actually impact them. So it's a moment where people are aware that they're connected to each other because those connections are hurting them. And it's about kind of mobilizing people to use those connections to help them rather than harm them. All of that sounds very abstract. But like, it's just a fact. People are connected to each other. It's what we do and how we value and the emphasis we place on those connections that matters, basically. Is that an answer? Okay. And then briefly about the ugly. Yeah, I'm as like ahnungslos and ratlos as you are. I think the only thing I've learned in my practice is like, don't rush. Like, when violence happens, there's a feeling of crisis, there's a feeling of scarcity. We're gonna get into the scarcity and abundance conversation. There's a feeling of scarcity, there's a feeling of like, everything needs to happen now and this is terrible and I'm gonna die. And that's real, I don't wanna deny that that's real. I've been there. But I think that taking away the urgency and making more space. So I think that the beauty of collective support is that more options become available that we could never have imagined. So I've been through a process where my community was around me, and together we came up with ideas that I never would have come up with on my own, right? And so I think that collectively we can actually create more space and more options for us and give ourselves more room and de-escalate the need to react immediately. That's the only positive thing I have to say about the ugly. I also think that people need to take this shit seriously, show up and be humble and get educated and take your time. Yeah. Maybe you want to say something about too much care and wanting to throw up.
Yeah. Okay, so dude, I feel you. So I was going to answer in two parts. One, where does my energy come from? So my energy comes from the ideological position, which there's another, but from the position of, I want us to survive. And maybe that's it, like I do take it seriously. Like maybe I'm not waiting for, you know what I mean? Like in my head, so this is the scarcity part again, right? Because in my head, it's like, I'm not sure if we're gonna survive 100 years from now. I don't. Have you met my president? Like, I want us to. And so for me, if we're going to survive, but we're not going to do it. Like, if I survive and it doesn't mean anything to me if it's just me. Like, that's not, So we have to. So that's what my brain just goes to. But people who know me will tell you, like, I'm someone who thinks about survival. Like, that's just my thing. Like, I think mothering is about survival. I think taking care of people is about surviving. And I want to do that. So that's it. And too much care? Oh my God, yeah, right? Jesus Christ. So I do not have, I do things like leave my kid and come to Berlin for a month in order to regenerate. But that's a really privileged position, let's get real about it. We can't all just fly off to a country. But more so, I think I have my strategy in life in general is that I am constantly looking for people who I'm constantly looking for those caretaking moments. Like, that for me is real. And so, if I have that and I have some kind of support, I can do almost anything, I think I have to say I found Berlin to be incredibly difficult to do that. That's why I don't live here. I tried. It didn't work. I found living in the third world to be easier. I find that people are more connected. And so you're allowed to live off of that somehow. You're allowed to give back. And I don't know how to do it in Berlin. I think that's her job.
I don't have an answer.
You don't live in Berlin either anymore. So
kind of inappropriate.
Yeah, that's.
I'm not the right person to answer.
Yeah, but that's the space that I try to create for me.
I want to try to answer.
Okay.
Zu deiner Frage, ich habe das nicht ganz verstanden, weil ich so richtig müde bin, aber vielleicht können wir probieren auf Deutsch. Ich habe so verstanden, du sagst, kannst du das nochmal sagen?
Was machen wir mit Leuten, die Gewalt ausüben?
Ja.
Und auch nicht anerkennen, dass sie anderen Menschen Gewalt antun oder denen es einfach egal ist.
Ja.
Und die staatliche Antwort dann ist, die müssen wir ins Gefängnis stecken, um die Gesellschaft oder Menschen zu schützen.
Ja.
Was machen wir mit denen?
Yeah. So I understood the question is you can, one of the Voraussetzungen, the conditions of working with people who cause harm on them changing their behavior is that they recognize that they've caused harm and that they want to change. So what do we do with people that don't recognize that they've caused harm and don't want to change? And yet we still don't want to use state mechanisms. I think some things I've heard from folks in New York, for instance, is that social pressure actually means a lot. And so having a community say, you're not going to be a part of this community anymore unless you recognize that this was fucked up and unless you work on yourself. And folks, I've heard stories, folks run away, leave their community and come back a few years later and realize, oh yeah, that's still there, I still need to work on it. A lot of people also run away, they leave communities, they go somewhere else, they continue perpetuating violence. So yeah, I don't know what to do with those people yet. I think there are also all kinds of other forms of harm that are done by institutions, that are done by corporations, for which we don't have an alternative to the legal system, and for which a lot of activists use the legal system in a strategic way. They may not really believe or be invested in the criminal legal system, but if they can sue, Nestle, they'll do it. Or if they can use the sexual harassment laws inside of an institution to get their boss fired, fucking do it. Great. I think it's more about getting the best outcomes for survivors. But yeah, all we've got is social pressure. One of the folks I interviewed, one of my most entertaining interviews, was a guy who works in New York, and he said, I don't know how to justify the fact that we use light amounts of coercion in order to teach people who've caused harm about consent, but I'll let some academic justify that. So that's another issue we are trying to figure out. Oh yeah. Oh, and I think there was a question here first, and then
maybe we wrap up in like 5 minutes. Here, there was a question.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Kind of.
I just want to thank you for your speech. Yeah. I just want to raise a question in terms of your view of the revolutionary motherhood. Now, in the areas where you worked, the mothers are very creative, but they also do have partners. Now, what are the contradictions in that? Because when the partners are, or when their partners are, this revolutionary motherhood or these mothers seems to be different people. But in a normal setup, when they are not around, they play the role of breadwinner, community organizers, and whatever you may mention. I'm asking this question because I was part of our struggle in South Africa. I'm from South Africa, and I've noticed that within our struggle also, it's actually the women who's actually the torchbearers of our struggle, be it in exile or be it at home. But the moment we realize our freedom that we have now, it's no more our revolutionary mothers who's taking the leading roles in whatever is happening. It's actually the menfolk. And that's why I'm posing this question. How do your concept of revolutionary motherhood, how do that play off in terms of these contradictions that are there in terms, if I look at male, female, yeah, how does it play off?
Wow, but I really want to think about that for a second. Like, I actually really want to think about that because I see that. I can totally see that. A couple of things come to me. I don't think any of these are a real answer. Maybe I'm going to just pose a whole bunch of more questions on top of it. One of the things that Alexis Pauling-Gumbs talks about is she talks about motherful communities and this is what you were referring to basically, that like rather than thinking about communities or think about families as being fatherless, this idea of fatherless communities, she says actually these communities are motherful communities. And that is sort of one of you're right, that's part of the foundations of what revolutionary mothering can look like, right? The only thing that I can really think about is think back to, because I feel like two things. One, as I said before, mama-centric communities get shit done. And two, what is the role of people I think that you have to constantly center mothering. And by that point I mean biological mothering, but like center mothering and center the people who do that work the best, who are most skilled at that work, who have been taught to do that work longest. You need to center them in your movements. And so, I want to say something, but I'm like hesitant. There's things I want to say, but I want to think them all the way through. So maybe I can talk to you. I want to talk about the Egyptian revolution and the things, and when I saw the changes happening, and I want to talk about Standing Rock and when success stopped being within reach, and what that looked like in terms of who was being centered in the work. I'm not saying, I know correlation isn't causation, but I know that when Standing Rock started to make the statements that only those who weren't vulnerable could come to Standing Rock, they also started to lose. There are a lot of different reasons. I'm just saying, but I see that again and again and again, and I kind of want to tell movements, like, stop shooting yourself in the foot. Like, the people who are making this work need to be centered in the work. And vulnerability is a good thing. So, yeah, I don't know. I need to think about that.
Maybe we take one or two last questions. Yeah, there's one over here.
Actually, I have a two question, but I need to make an introduction because I'm going to speak English so good, so I can explain myself better. One of the questions related to the question of how people they ask about community. And I think I'm someone living here for 2 years now, and I think it's a very, yes, there is community actually. Most of you think you're not living in community, but I think you are living in a community. It's very wide actually when you live with people of color itself, you know, because you are so obsessed in inviting people to your space, but in not including them in your space. And and the question here came for me like I'm asking myself, okay, I don't want to live in a place. Also, I didn't find myself when I decided to stay with people. They want to stay a group of migrant people of color together. I found it also producing other violence by thinking, victimizing themselves and thinking what the only harming thing happened to themselves, and so you center yourself, so you start victimizing yourself. But at the same time, when I think, okay, so I want to include myself, someone with my background coming from to this land to communicate with the I want to speak just about the left queer because that's the one I know it and the one I most communicated with. So how can I think I'm part of community when the community is is obsessed of inviting me, you know, is obsessed, you know. So when I want to look for a house, I'm gonna find all this category. I want to live with PUC, black people, whatever. Yeah, you are inviting me. So to invite me after that to decide over this issue, over this zoo, if I can live with you or not. So how this idea of community in those contexts producing violence?
Mm-hmm.
This is, I don't know how if there's answer or way to contribute.
Can we give the
in
mic to Zoya? I'd love to give the mic to Zoya to answer. Did you want to answer that or speak to that?
Just kind of speak to it.
Great.
Like this is outside.
Oh, thank you, Nadia.
And the second question?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't
Yeah.
My apologies.
The second question is related to the idea of the motherhood, of the mother logic. Yes, this is the most place I found it very difficult to be a mother. You know, I live in a very, very different community, and in the service world is much easy. I live in very every couple of years I'm living in a new community, I'm establishing new thing, but it is most community is the left Berlin one is criminalizing mother, and I never saw community obsessed in this way in different issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've just been kind of like hearing a lot of this and having my own thoughts and not knowing how to bring it up, but I feel like Raja's first comment kind of gave me an entry point into this. I definitely have a strong sense of community and care here in Berlin, as we've spoken about a little bit, and most of that comes specifically from the queer and trans, Black and POC community. And for sure, it's also a community, and like when I say community, it's more linked to spaces that we share together. And the spaces that we create are also full of care and full of this kind of mothering that you're talking about, you know, across the gender spectrum, but whether it's emotional labor or, you know, like cutting up food, cleaning the space, just kind of like, I don't know, doing the legwork to make a space or event come alive. And it definitely doesn't have anything to do with sharing bibliographies or sharing biographies, maybe because also a lot of us come from this experience of having to explain where we're coming from all the time. But I mean, just last weekend, we had a space that some people who were coming from out of town to attend were telling me also that, you know, they just so felt warmly invited and embraced in also ways that they hadn't in North America or other places that they'd lived. And I kind of wanted to, you know, so when you're talking about care and collectivity in a Berlin context, and not a specific context, which is I think a more white context, I just kind of felt like I needed to address this. Also, I mean, looking around at the room, and even an event where a Black woman is invited to come and speak, that the audience is vastly white, I feel like if this community that I'm a part of, where I experience so much care, is also lacking in this community where you're also expressing that there's a lack of care, then maybe also there needs to be a stronger link made between the exclusion of mothering and care and the exclusion of Black and brown bodies. I just wanted to kind of...
Thank you. Did you want to speak to either of those questions?
Yeah, I'm just quickly.
I think it's on, actually.
Oh, my bad. I know most of you can hear me, but I think because English may not be your first language, it's probably easier if I'm, right? Usually I speak without a microphone because I can stand up and scream. I just wanted to say, I was going to state from my own experience. I lived in Berlin in 2013. My daughter was 6 at the time. I found mothering here to be the hardest. It almost broke me. In the leftist, radical spaces that I was supposedly moving through, I found it, I guess I still get like choked up just thinking about it. And I found, strangely enough, that in the radical POC spaces, or the queer radical POC, especially queer, I was told that I was basically, I'll be blunt. People saw me with my daughter and assumed I wasn't queer. Like, mothering can take away certain parts of your identity, because when people see you're a mother, that's it. Like, they have automatic assumptions about. So I don't actually have that experience at all. I had a very different experience, and I felt like it was kind of emotionally violent. And so, I feel like I would have loved to have had that. Like, for reals. And I do feel like when I was here, and I lived in this area, I feel like my housing insecurity was huge. Constantly trying to find a community to get basic resources. I don't speak German, so I had to and I said that I just do all these things. I found that there was very little space, and I was really surprised. And I'm someone who's lived, obviously, in a lot of places. I feel like I'm not used to dealing in a different language or finding new things. You know what I mean? I had this. If there's anyone who should have been able to, I felt like it should have been me and my kid. So. Yeah, I'm gonna have to sit with that one too. So I don't always have. Yeah, I just wanted to say I found people were very obsessed by the fact that I was a mother, but not in a positive way. And actually, I wrote in this book the chapters that the stuff that I wrote while I was in Berlin, and I think it comes across as more negative than I feel now, because I was in such a hard space, trying to do basic things. Okay, that's it. That's all I'm gonna say about that.
Are there any last questions or comments? Otherwise, I think that was actually a good, pointing out some of the pains and the pleasures or beauties of different Berlin communities. And also, I really appreciate that specification that a lot of my addressing to the Berlin left is about a white German left. And everyone who knows me knows that I could go on my bitterness tour talking shit about Berlin, but I really appreciate lifting up that there are really beautiful, motherful and loving communities happening in this space, and that if the white German left was prioritizing them more and that form of relating more, I'm just repeating what you said, then we would be in a better situation, basically. So I think I'm gonna wrap up and say thank you to all of you guys who are here, fighting the good fight and doing the good struggle, and you made my week a lot better. It's really touching to be in the presence. A lot of you in the crowd participated directly or indirectly in what's in this room right here, and so I'm really thankful to have you as my people and my community. I have a lot of love for all of you tonight. I did want to point out that that there is a press conference about a Berlin campaign to ban racial profiling and the practice of cops creating gefährliche Orte, so like dangerous areas in the city where racial profiling is allowed, more or less. And if you want to learn more about that campaign, there are flyers that are going to be on Mai'a's table over there. They're actually having their press conference here in this space on Thursday at 11. And one of the organizers of that campaign, Celine, was also part of the group from the Muslim feminist roundtable that are organizing the iftar tonight. Do you want to say something about the iftar? Yeah, look, it's gonna be
Just very quickly, actually, it's already time to break fast.
Sorry.
So it's a holy month of Ramadan, a very important month, and we would like to share a little bit of food with you guys. It's not a lot. It was a bit difficult to spontaneously organize it, but maybe you want traditionally to take a date and drink some water and then enjoy the evening all together.
Yeah, I don't know if this, I wanted to add that part of the importance of why Nadia wanted to organize this.
Do you want to?
Part of the, thanks for, I was like, when Melanie told me about this event, I was like, wow, that's great, about security, awesome. We Muslims were like at the forefront, whether like we were like the Geburtszeuginnen of this whole discourse about security. And so I feel like we should also be centered in thinking about alternatives and combating this carceral and oppressive idea of security. So that's why I thought, okay, since it's Ramadan, we do our thing together with you guys.
Thanks. Thanks to everybody for being here.